How did we get here? How did we manage to change this law as much as we have been able to? And that is, the next thing I'll talk about. Before I get there, though, there's still a couple more challenges that kind of shaped that in this entire process. One is the optics challenge. This is something that we've talked about when it was when we had our training, when it was just a Senate bill, that when an assembly member or a lawmaker is faced with this bill, there's still the optics of, well, I need to vote against discrimination. I can't come across as if I'm supporting discrimination. And so even though the legal arguments make sense, as we can see throughout the analysis, as we saw as we were talking to members of the assembly, there's the optics challenge of this. The second thing is the political reality, and that's specific to what occurred in the Assembly Judiciary Committee. One, Wahab was emboldened by a near unanimous vote in the Senate. And so as we were working with different caucuses and different assembly members, Wahab had a line in the sand and we had a line in the sand. And that her line in the sand was she refused to remove the word caste, even though the meaning, they would contend that that caste is a form of ancestry, or that ancestry would be inclusive of caste. And our line in the sand was that caste has to go because of the plain meaning of the word, because California textbooks require that caste be taught as something that's inherent to India and Hinduism. And so what I think the assembly members that were kind of going to the mat for us realized is that it was going to be impossible to remove caste completely. Two people who I think we need to acknowledge as a community are assembly members, Alex Lee and Evan Lowe. Both of them are involved in the Asian American Pacific Islander caucus, and were just really going out of their way to ensure that our concerns were being heard and that they were trying to broker the best deal possible. Now, there's also what kind of the optics was one challenge. The other challenge is the South Asian calculus. One, you have Jasmeet Bains, who is the second South Asian in the assembly who was a co-sponsor. And then Kalra, Ash Kalra, not Samir Kalra, but Ash Kalra, already voted for the amended version. So he's likely to vote for the final version because he's already voted for it once. So long as you have two South Asians voting for it, it kind of gives the others cover to vote for the bill, even though it still may remain problematic. Now, the last stage is going to be a veto. From what we've heard from kind of Capitol insiders, as well as some of the offices, is that the governor's veto is unlikely. That doesn't mean it's impossible, but just to give you some context, over the past decade, the California legislature introduces anywhere between 1,900 to 2,500 bills per year in each year of a 2-year legislative session. Now, I share this because even though this has kind of been front center, we've been eating, drinking, breathing SB403. It's one of probably, 2,600 bills that different assembly members are looking at, senators are looking at, and that the governor will at least see a large number of those come to his desk. So in 2023, while the average has been 1,900 to 2,500 over the past decade, this year there's already 2,632 bills. This is not just higher than normal, but it's the highest in a decade. And then to give you some context of, well, how many bills actually get signed and how many get vetoed? Well, in 2022, there were 2,020 bills, of which 997 got signed into law and 169 got vetoed. So you can kind of get an idea of the ratio. And as I mentioned before, indications are that he will likely sign the bill, but that doesn't mean it's over from our perspective.
So can I actually just add one thing right there, Suhag?
Yeah, sure,
So if you
please.
actually notice that statistic that Suhag just gave was that out of the original 2000 something odd bills, half of them kind of died at some point in the process, and 1,000 or more, whatever that around that number, made it to the governor's desk. And out of that, I think it was the number was or percentage was almost 90% of those were signed into law, right? 900 something were
999,
signed,
right.
and then 100 something were vetoed. So that again shows, if we look at the actual statistic of those that make it out of the legislature and then are signed by the governor, that's a 90% or so number. That's a very high number. So again, going back to the point that Sohag made about, what is the likelihood of getting a veto? It is realistically very low. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but I just wanted to point out that actual 90% statistic there.
Thanks, Samir. Yeah, no, that's exactly why I thought the numbers were important, just to give everyone some context. Now, I kind of alluded to two assembly members going to the mat, but how did we actually get here? How did we get from a Senate bill that had hardly any changes, had racist language about South Asians, with unsubstantiated claims about us engaging in unlawful and criminal conduct? How did we get to a bill that is quite stripped from its original version? And especially after it passed nearly unanimously. And this is really the outcome of or the result of private assembly negotiations prompted by public pressure. And Samir already talked about how we have seen an unprecedented response from the community, various organizations, individuals, moms, dads, kids, all lining up to speak out for their civil rights. So what led to these major amendments? First, I want to talk about our meeting with Tom Clark, and he's what is called a committee consultant. And what we learned or have learned over this whole process is that a committee consultant can be quite influential. And we had a meeting with Tom Clark all the way back in mid-May, after we knew that the bill had passed the Senate and would be proceeding on to the Assembly. And as we were talking to him, he kind of very strongly agreed with some of the concerns that we were raising, the legal concerns, with a few disagreements on equal protection and things like that. However, by and large, we were on the same page. And he said, I'm considering proposing some amendments. Now, we had, when the bill first came out in March or April, already thought through, well, if an opportunity comes to amend the bill, what might that look like, where we can get rid of the word caste, but still give assurance to Senator Wahab that whatever concerns that she was saying she was worried about, that those could be addressed. So we already had proposed language. We were literally able to turn that around in a matter of an hour and send it over to Tom Clark. And as we'll go into more of the details of what the bill looks like today, I think you'll be able to see how the amendments that we offered really created the foundation for where we are, aside from the continued use of the word caste today. First, we had proposed that we remove all the racist language about South Asians, about Asians, South Americans, and the unsubstantiated blanket claims of South Asians engaging in things like human trafficking, wage theft, rape, and assault. We also had proposed that the word caste as a standalone category be removed. And then the last thing we had proposed is that ancestry be clarified to include a number of different factors that were facially neutral, because our argument from day one has been that caste is a facially discriminatory category because it's so closely associated, if not exclusively associated, with South Asians and specifically Indians and Hindus, that let's say that ancestry is inclusive of things like birthplace, community, descent, family, heritage, parentage, or inherited social class origin and status. Anyone can have a birthplace. Anyone has a heritage. The same can't be said about caste. And so that's kind of what we had, well, not kind of, but it's exactly what we had proposed. Now, a few weeks later, after we had had meetings with Assembly members, Alex Lee and Evan Lowe, and a number of other community members had as well, they also reached out to us saying, hey, there seems to be an appetite for amendments, at least from the Assembly side, but not necessarily Senator Wahab. What might that look like? So, we shared with them that, hey, listen, Tom Clark, the committee consultant, already has our amendments. We'll give them to you as well. Now, as I mentioned before, what it came down to was the line in the sand. And both the senator or the author of the bill's line in the sand was that caste had to stay, and the community's was that caste had to go. And in an effort to just make sure that she didn't insist that the original bill get voted on as is, they saw this as the only way, and that was to amend the bill. And we'll go into more details about that. But I think that it's important for at least our supporters to know that the proposed amendments was something that we had worked on months ago, and it was an investment in time and foresight that I think did pay off.